Good morning. It's Wednesday, the 10th of March, and this is our daily video from Yoker Evangelical Church. In our Bible reading plan this morning, we read from Job chapter 39 and 2 Corinthians chapter 9. If you haven't read those yet today, why not pause this video, go and read those, pray about them, think about them, and then maybe come back and share this thought. It's far more important that we are reading the Bible for ourselves than that you watch these videos. So if you haven't done that yet, pause this and do that. I want to take a look at Job chapter 39 today because I think it helps us when we are suffering, as the whole book of Job has. I think as we see God's response, it helps us to think this through. And the question I want to start with is, when someone is angry at God, how do you think God responds? In a situation where somebody has suffered and they are saying, God, why have you done this? Where they even feel angry at God. Where somebody feels totally unsatisfied with the life they have and they say, God, why have you done this? Or when somebody has maybe lost a loved one after years of illness and they cry out, God, I know you're there, but I just find it hard to believe that you are still loving. How does God respond when people are angry with him? Does God say, there, that's how you feel, thank you for expressing yourself? Or does God say, who do you think you're talking to? How do you think God responds? In Job chapter 39, I think we get a glimpse of what God might actually say in that situation. Throughout this book of Job, we have seen Job's response to all his suffering. If you remember way back at the start, Job had everything taken away. He was totally afflicted. And this book has been Job exploring that. And I think we've seen his response to that. At first, it seemed pretty good, despite what Satan had accused him of and what his wife encouraged him to do. Job still praised God. Then perhaps as the initial shock wore off and it started to settle on him, he wished that he hadn't been born. But then as his friends begin to talk to him, and as they start to say, Job, listen, you must have done something to deserve this, and he keeps declaring his innocence, Job starts to question God's goodness. In fact, he says, if I knew where I could find God, I would bring accusations against him. Job starts to question whether God really did have his best interests at heart. And Job starts to think, maybe God needs to answer me for what's happened. Well, at the end of the book of Job, that is exactly what we see. Starting in chapter 38, God responds to what Job says, and it's very dramatic. He appears in a storm and speaks directly to Job. And it's important to see this as God's love and mercy. In his kindness, he comes to Job to teach him in the midst of his suffering. And maybe this morning you're thinking, oh, I'd like God to speak to me. It would be wonderful if in my suffering I could have a word from God just to help me. Well, I want to encourage you that he has spoken to you. In his word, the Bible, God has given us everything we could need to know. And in this chapter this morning, I think we see God's response to a sufferer who is angry with God. And so we don't need God to come and speak directly to us again. We have his word in the Bible. And God's answer that he gives, it reminds Job of who God is. And he does that in chapter 39 by looking at loads of different examples from nature. And God teaches Job to look out and to see all the different things that can help him understand who God is. So he looks at mountain goats and wild donkeys. He looks at the wild ox, ostriches, horses, hawks and eagles. He looks at all these aspects of nature, and the thing that is consistent is their uncontrollableness. God says again and again, you know that these things exist, but you don't know how they work. You can't control them. It's a theme from the whole response to Job of you are not in control, God is. God shows Job that there are loads of things that are beyond his control or even his ability to understand. Simply put, God's answer to Job is that Job is not God. He cannot see all that God sees. He cannot possibly understand all that God is doing. And in response to that, all of Job's clever arguments, they disappear. Job's accusations that he said he was going to bring to God, he retracts them. He says, God, actually, I've got this wrong. God's answer to Job is to remind Job of who God is. Now, this isn't an easy answer to suffering. I think it would be far too simple and unloving to simply say in response to suffering, well, we're not God, so we can't understand. But I would be sceptical of any answer to suffering that was so simple. This chapter encourages us to look to the God who controls all of creation and to simply trust that he is able to know more than we are. To trust that in his goodness, he allows bad things to happen because he understands more than we can. He comprehends the world in a way that is totally beyond us. And he calls Job to trust in that, and I think he calls us to trust in that. The simple truth that we are not God, but God is. I hope you have a great day today, and God bless.